Good evening. My name is John Dewick, and I'm here to talk with you tonight about family and community math events. Thank you for joining, being a part of this. Hopefully, you had a great time at the opening session with all that was shared by the speakers and talking about how you can be engaged with your students at such a great level. And now, thanks for joining me at this part to get into some of the more details of what it can look like to bring families in, bring the community in, talk about mathematics and what that can look like as you engage, continue the conversation, and fully enjoy those families coming into your school, to your district as you move forward. So again, I see that people are jumping in. They're saying hello. So glad you can be a part of this. That you enjoyed all that was happening, and some of you are putting in like where you're from and what you do. So wonderful to see that engagement just in this part right now. It's not always easy when we're doing something virtual, and not to be together in a room sharing, talking in that capacity. So again, uh, thanks for committing to being a part of an event like this, giving up a few hours of your evening, and hopefully you'll fully engage in what we're doing here. So I'll move forward. Again, my name is John Dewick. I work in Fresno for the Office of the County Superintendent of Schools. I have worked in the math and science program for a few years, and now I work in the early care and education program. So I've been in that capacity helping out with the I got to get onto this, helping out with the California Early Math Initiative. So CAEMI is what we call this, CAMI. So I've been working on this project for a few years now with some special funding. So everything that I do is being piloted. We're working on this with what it can look like in a local capacity, and then it will be available for statewide consumption. So everything that I'm doing here, I will be sharing with you right away, but you'll also be able to view this on a grander and more formal scale in the coming year as we make this more beautiful and again formalized for everyone. My email is on this slide. You can also see my Twitter handle. You can always contact me in these ways if you have questions afterwards or in the future with what may pop into your head and things that come to your mind. We'll have a Q&A session at the end where you can type in anything you're wondering about. And everything that I share will be available for you. So there'll be nothing held back. You'll have this exact same slide deck shared with you so that you can go back, review things, click the links, and check everything out that's on there. So for the most part, what we're talking about is going to be about family engagement. We say community engagement because we certainly want to make sure that we're considering what it looks like to bring the community in. But most of us are dealing with our school, with our district, and what that looks like. We also can apply this to some of our library work. So I work with school libraries, but also with public libraries to help them engage families, parents, community members, and what math can look like with any age. So I work specifically now in that birth to age 8, but certainly a family engagement night, a math night can be all the way up into the middle school, maybe even high school, although I've never treaded into that zone right there. So here we go as we dig a little bit further in. If you could take a moment and think about what are some of the words that come to your mind when you think about a family and community math event. So I have a few that are here on the screen that you can consider, but maybe you could type into the chat. What is a word or a phrase that you might all of a sudden think about in terms of, if I were to do a family math event, this is the word, or this is the thought that comes to me right away. This is what resonates with me and I can't stay away from. Or maybe you've done one and you have a memory, hopefully a great memory about that event and what that was like. So what else can you put in the chat now? We've done a lot of introductions about who we are and what we do, but now consider if you have done an event like this, or if you're considering an event like this, what might that be? What's the word that comes to you? And I'll give a moment to be silent so you can look at what those words are. I see fun. Not too many more. Let's see what else we can get. Fun, a lot of fun, teamwork, bingo, inviting. Those are great words to read, and hopefully those are things that are spurring some memories or ideas of what it could look like with all of that. So great to have that and have that available right there. So here's what we're going to do to start off with. We're going to talk about the agenda of what it might look like and also the logistics of what it might look like. We're going to start off talking about an agenda, and that will be the bulk of our time. And I'll take you through what a family math event can look like. And then we'll spend the remainder of the time going over logistics and close out with the Q&A time. So let's talk about what that event can look like and how it would uh, turn around and look like out of your hands and out of your mind. So we are going to look at an event now that I created that was really about shapes. I was thinking about what that could look like and how we could work through shapes from a primary point of view. So I put this one together and I've piloted it 2 or 3 times where we had preschool through third grade invited. And then we had, of course, children that were other ages also, because families come to this and families come together and they take part in this. So they bring an older sibling or a younger sibling or a cousin or a neighbor who's joining us in. So even though we might gauge this for a grade span, we get outliers to that. And that's not a problem because we want them to be doing math together. Whatever that looks like, whether it's a little more rigorous because of our age, or maybe it's a review or too easy, they're still engaging in the mathematics as a family and talking about that. All right. So when I do this workshop, this specific one on shapes, I start off with a little more of something for the younger students, and I move it up through the upper grades. And everything that I do for these is based off of children's books. So I use a lot of support from the site countplayexplore.org, where I can draw ideas off of books and activities that go with them. And we'll talk about Count, Play, Explore also as we go along. So after I welcome families and get them kind of situated into what this is so they know what we're doing, I introduce who I am and what that looks like, tell them we're going to be talking about math and engaging in the math and responding to the math and talking about the math with what we do. I start with a book called Perfect Square. So I learned about this book about a year or two ago. And I just thought it was a beautiful book that hopefully you will also think is a beautiful book. Part of what we're going to do tonight is watch portions of a YouTube video where the book is being read to us. I thought it would be a little bit easier for all of us if I did something off of YouTube as opposed to me trying to read a book virtually to you and show you pictures off of that. So using this new platform for the first time, I'm going to try and show you a few minutes of a perfect square, and then we'll talk about what that looks like. So as I do this, here we go.
The thing that's different about a Verbo vacation home, you always have the whole.
Perfect Square by Michael Hall. It was a perfect square. It had 4 matching corners and 4 equal sides. And it was perfectly happy. But on Monday, the square was cut into pieces and poked full of holes. It wasn't perfectly square anymore. So it made itself into a fountain that babbled and giggled and clapped. On Tuesday, the square was torn into scraps. So it made itself into a garden. On Wednesday, the square was shredded in strips. So it made itself into a park. On Thursday, the square was shattered. So it made itself into a bridge. On Friday, the square was snipped into ribbons. So it made itself into a river.
Okay, so I got to leave a little bit of a cliffhanger for you. If I showed you the whole book, then you'd know it. But you can watch that video on your own sometime if you do a search for it, or you can maybe purchase the book or find it at a local library. So we talk about this book. I read this book to the families. It doesn't take too long. And then I hand out origami squares to them. So you can get origami squares. I got to make sure this shows in there. I think I got 500 sheets for maybe $8 to $10. But I can hand them out, and then they can tear this up, cut it up if I have scissors on the table, and they can look at what can they do with these squares, what can they make. And as a little bit of an assist, I can also offer them to have this page, which I found online for free. This was on Teachers Pay Teachers. Someone had taken this book and put a whole PDF together. And this one was offered for free, so I have no problem sharing this with you. But it was a great way for them to look at the pictures that had been created in that book and get some ideas. So then I can have the children, the parents, whoever is there, taking this paper, cutting, tearing, and seeing what can they make out of this color paper. So I have lots of colors available because when you get the origami paper, it comes in an array of colors for them to look at. So they're cutting, tearing, moving things around. They're making rivers, they're making trees, they're doing all sorts of fun stuff because they're just creating. So what I learned is that I can really let this go as long as they're enjoying themselves. So I had one family math night where this lasted about 10 minutes, but I had another family math night where we were 15 minutes in and almost every family was engaged and asking for more paper and what they could do. So it was really neat to watch them really like grab onto this and take advantage of that, because what I really want them to do is go home and think about what they can do with torn paper. What artwork can they do at home? So it's not just about what we're doing that night. I'm trying to encourage these families to do the math and talk about it in their own home. Watch the book again when you're at home. See what it's like and talk about what's going on with this. Also, when you're on countplayexplore.org, you can find some activities that also go along with the book. And one of them shows you how you can take an 8.5 by 11 paper and make a square out of it by folding up one corner, tearing the different a portion of it off, and then you have the advantage of making your own squares, even if you don't have square paper available to you. Many of us don't have square paper available. We have 8.5 by 11 because that's what's in our printer perhaps, or what our children bring home. Or if you're a teacher, it's just the paper that you have right away. So being able to make those squares, talk about those squares. And of course, most of you are thinking, I don't even need to do this just with my families. I can do this with my children. So maybe this is something you do tomorrow or next week, where you read this book, show this book, and then you can be creative and make those squares. But again, encouraging them to do this as a family, talk about it, and work together in all of this. So that's a perfect square, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now, when you get this slideshow and you look at it, you can see under that white circle where it says Book 1, it has www.countplayexplore and other information. This is a link to a page that shows you what you can do with a perfect square and activities. And I'll be leading you back to Count, Play, Explore throughout our time together here. All right. So that's our most primary one. Then we go into a book called Circus Shapes. And Circus Shapes was written by a man named Stuart Murphy. And he has dozens of children's books available. And all of them that I know of pertain to mathematics. So you can read this book with your children, and then to your children and your families, you can point out the math in here. So this is one that I struggled with because it's not very exciting to read. It's a book for 4, 5, 6-year-olds as they go through it, and I'll show you some pages. So the first time that I used this book at a family event, I stopped after a few pages, said, you can read this on your own. And my wife was there with me. And she said, I think this would be better served if you actually brought the TK kindergarten children closer and read it to them. And then you ask them questions to model for the families. This is the type of question you can ask as you read a book like this. So the next time that I did this book, that I did a shape night with families, I did just that. So I had about 30 people at the event. There are about 8 or 9 families that were present. So once I got to this point, I invited everyone, all the children who were 4, 5, or 6 to come forward. And then I got on the ground with them and I told the parents, as I read this book, listen to where I pause and what questions I ask, and think about why I'm doing that. So then as I read this book to the children, I was able to stop and ask questions, ask them to point out different things, and think about what's happening in this book. So here's an example of one portion of the book. Elephants make a circle, then march round and round. Remember, it's called Circus Shapes, so these are elephants at a circus. So on this page, I would stop and say, do you see any circles? Can you point to some circles? How many circles do you see? And we have students who will point out that there's circles on the elephants' backs. There are students that will point out that there's circles on the bottom right of the page. There'll be students who recognize that there's circles all across the center there in that pink salmon color. Circles everywhere that we can talk about and look at and talk about what they mean, what defines a circle. Does a circle have sides or not? So that we're giving vocabulary to the children, but we're also giving vocabulary to the parents, and that they can really check that out and think about, what does that mean? Because one of the big things that happens is just knowing what the vocabulary is. All right, so one more page of this book so you can kind of see what's in there. It also goes into information on general shapes. Circus shapes are everywhere. Circle, square, triangle. You can point out all of these shapes on this page throughout the book as you read it. It's a wonderful book to be talking about with the children and what that looks like. So at this point, when I'm in there, I do this great activity where we play charades. And a lot of people say, like, you're playing charades with these families? What does that mean? Well, so when you play charades, you can't talk. You're supposed to act out what that means. So we do something called shape charades with everyone. So I partner people up. Usually it's the families that partner up, maybe children and adults, or one-on-one when they do this. So if I have one person, well, how about this? If it's two people, they face each other. And one of them has their back to me and one of them is facing me. But remember, they're facing each other right there. So I can hold up my shapes, and the person who's facing me is trying to get the other one to say what it is. So I can hold up this. Let me see if I can make that show up well. Nope, I can't. So this page has the word circle, and it has a circle on it. So the person who's facing me sees the word circle, and they start to act out with their hands or with their body what a circle is, trying to get the other person to say that. So here's a picture of what it looks like going on right there. So this is a family math event that took place, and this is a mom who's attempting to get her children to say actually the word circle right there. So she saw me holding up the sign saying circle. The two girls had their back to me and couldn't see it, and they're acting out what that looks like. At that same event, here's another family. These are actually sisters, these moms, who had both of their children there, and they're acting out a shape trying to get their kids to do the same thing. So it's fun, and there's a lot of laughter as we do this, trying to just talk through and about the vocabulary and the words that pop up as you play shape charades. You can do this with your class if you want to. It's super fun, and the families really enjoy it. So finally, one last thing about shapes. When you go to Count, Play, Explore, you can find videos there that show parents and family members what it looks like to talk about math and the math all around us. So one of the videos is called Shape Safari. Well, when you watch Shape Safari, it's about a dad driving with his son, and they're pointing out all the shapes around them, what that looks like. These aren't dry videos that say, this is what you do. They're videos of it actually happening and what it looks like. So parents can take 90 seconds, watch this on their phone, and you can put this in a newsletter or share it at the event if you want to get them already looking at the site and what can go along with that. All right, so the third book that I use, we started with A Perfect Square, which was much more preschool primary. We move on to Circus Shapes, which is moving up a little bit higher in the primary grades. And now we go on to Grandfather Tang's Story. Now, Grandfather Tang's Story has been around for a long time. Some of you may know about it. Some of you, this might be your first time seeing it. But this is about tangrams. So tangrams are a 7-piece puzzle that looks like this square on the left-hand side. Now, those shapes have just been moved around to make this cat that you can see right there. So I'm going to go back one slide really quick. And actually, I can do it like this. I'm going to show you just the beginning of Grandfather Tang's Story, and we'll see what that looks like. All right.
Grandfather
When you get your next big idea, Grammarly's tone suggestions can help pitch it with confidence to get
Grandfather Tang's Story, a tale told with tangrams. Anne Tompert, illustrated by Robert Andrew Parker. Grandfather Tang and Little So were sitting under a peach tree in their backyard. They were amusing each other by making different shapes with their tangram puzzles. "Let's do a story about the fox fairies," said Little So. So Grandfather Tang arranged his 7 tangram pieces into the shape of a fox. Then Grandfather Tang made another fox with Little So's 7 tangram pieces. Little So claps her hands as Grandfather began. Although Chow and Wu Ling were best friends, they were always trying to outdo each other. One day, this rivalry almost brought their friendship to a tragic end. They were sitting under their favorite willow tree beside the river, talking about their magic powers. "I can change myself into a rabbit as quick as a wink," boasted Wu Ling. "I bet you can't do that." "I can too," said Chow. "Cannot," said Wu Ling. Anyway, actions speak louder than words, and he changed himself into a rabbit. "Not bad," said Chow, smoothing his whiskers. "But watch me do better than that." And before Wu Ling could blink, Chow changed himself from a fox into a dog. Now, when Chow changed himself into a dog, not only looked like a dog, but he felt like a dog, and he acted like a dog. He bared his teeth and lashed his tail. Wu Ling shivered and twitched his nose. "I love rabbits," Chow growled, "and I'm going to get you and gobble you up." The dog edged closer and closer. Wu Ling's eyes grew bigger and bigger. He was too frightened to move at first, but then he thought, "I'll be safe if I can climb up the willow tree." He puffed up his tail, grew a long, bushy tail, and his ears shrunk as Wu Ling transformed himself into a squirrel. Wu Ling sprang into the willow tree and scrambled up to the top. "Chow will probably turn himself into a cat so he can climb up the tree after me," Wu Ling said to himself, "but he'll never catch me. I'll jump from tree to tree and he won't be able to follow me." Of course Chow thought about changing himself into a cat, but that was just what Wu Ling expects me to do, he said to himself. "What can I do to surprise him?" He thought and thought. "I know. I'll swoop down from above him," and he turned himself into a hawk. Chow circled.
All right, so obviously chaos ensues right here. But the most important thing to realize is that all of these animals that the foxes are turning into are based out of these tangram shapes. They're just being moved around to create those animals that are a part of it. So it's really fun for the families to come together and take these tangram shapes. So I just buy them in bulk. You can get from various companies kind of a box of them with about 30 of them. So I put them in Ziploc bags. I hand them out to the families to use. There's a way that you can like fold and tear a square to make tangrams, but that's a whole nother thing and takes a long time. But it's a lot of fun. But if you have these tangram shapes and you have a few for each family to move around and play with, they can make these shapes and talk about them. Now, one really cool thing that I did is I gave them this paper that shows all the different animals you can make. So at the first couple of family maths where I was practicing this shape experience with primary grades, I didn't use this. And they had a good time using them, using the tangram shapes to make a square, make a triangle. Can you use 2 shapes to make a square? Can you use 3 shapes to make a square? Can you use 5 shapes to make a square? We talked about that. And you can use tangrams to talk about halves and fourths and percentages and proportions. It's a great tool for a lot of math that begins in the primary grades and moves up all the way through some middle school concepts. But the latest family math that I did, I had about, like I said, 30 families at that one. And I gave them this handout that says Grandfather Tang's Story, the one that's on the right there. Well, I gave it to them and nobody wanted to stop using the tangrams. So this tangram puzzles and making these shapes took like 20 minutes. And when I was trying to pull them back to move on to some more activities, they really wanted to keep playing with the tangrams. I actually had enough tangrams where I was able to give each family some, which satisfied them. But I recommend if you do this as I'm showing you, use this handout, but don't give it to them until the end because it takes a lot of time to draw your families back if they're having a really fun time with it. You don't want to stop them from having a fun time. You want them to fully engage and enjoy it. But sometimes you need to move on. So that's my little warning as you move into this. But you get to talk about the shapes, think about what they are, and how they fit on top of each other. It's a great activity. I use tangrams all the time with my children and with my students, and certainly at a family community math night. The fourth and final book I want to talk about is one of my favorites ever. It's called The Greedy Triangle. The Greedy Triangle was written by Marilyn Burns, who has a few fabulous books out there. I almost have this book memorized. I've known about it for, I don't know, 20 years maybe. So it's wonderful. And it talks about a triangle that is dissatisfied with its shape. So we're going to go back to, well, I think we're getting short on time, so I'll just kind of tell you about this. This triangle begins to feel dissatisfied. It's happy that it can be slices of pie and halves of sandwiches and much, much more, but it realizes that it just wants something different. So it goes to the shapeshifter, and the shapeshifter says, I can do that. If you want one more side and one more angle, I can make that happen. So the shapeshifter turns the triangle into, what would you say? If it gets one more side and one more angle, what does a triangle become? Any guesses? You can put that into the chat. I know there's a bit of a lag sometimes to the presentation. So if you add one more side and one more angle to a triangle, what shape do we get? All right. I actually had some people that are texting me right now, some friends of mine who are being kind of smart about it. So the most common answer that you get from your families is that it's a square, but actually it's a quadrilateral. And we talk about that. Like, yeah, a square is a legitimate answer. And if I have 4, 5, 6-year-olds, even 7-year-olds telling me square, actually anyone who tells me square, I'm going to be excited that they gave me an answer. We also want to consider that any 4-sided shape that is all straight sides is called a quadrilateral. And I talk about how quad means 4 and lateral means sides. If you want to step back a little bit, you can talk about how a polygon is any shape that has straight sides. So a triangle is a 3-sided polygon, 3 sides, 3 angles, all of them are straight, no curvy lines. And then 4 sides is a quadrilateral. So then we have the greedy quadrilateral, and the quadrilateral likes being what it is. It's a frame for pictures, it's books, it's windows, it's doors, but it begins to feel restless and dissatisfied. And then it goes back to the shapeshifter and asks for one more side and one more angle. And what does it become at that point? A pentagon, and then a hexagon, and on as it travels through being unsure of what it wants to be. So it's a wonderful book for these families to be reminded of, again, the vocabulary that goes along with geometry. What are these shapes? And you can go back to quadrilateral and talk about all the different types of quadrilaterals: squares, rectangles, rhombus, parallelograms, trapezoids, and all the rules that go along with that. And when I start talking that way, sometimes we get a little overwhelmed, but if we slowly walk through what these are and what these shapes are defined by, we can have a really good conversation and reminder, because we want our families to use the right math terms when their children come home. We want these children to have the right math terms and have that conversation with their families, with their moms, dads, siblings, uncles, aunts, cousins. Who's ever in that house wants to be a rich conversation where they're understanding the right words that go with the math that we talk about right there. So one phrase in this book, it goes into, like I said, again and again, the shape became restless, dissatisfied, and unhappy with life. Again and again, it returned to the shapeshifter for more sides and more angles. The shapeshifter agreed to turn it into one shape after another: a hexagon, a heptagon, an onagon, an octagon, and on. So we talk about the fact of what is a 6-sided shape called? What is a 7-sided shape called? What is an 8-sided, 9-sided shape called? So it's a wonderful thing to be guessing and seeing if they remember that. And then I let them know, and you can see that I've italicized it right here, that a seven-sided shape actually has two names. It can be called a heptagon or a septagon. And if any of you saw the sequel to Finding Nemo, which was called Finding Dory, there's a sea creature that was at one time was an octopus, but it loses an arm. And so he calls himself a septopus. So it's a play on words that sometimes helps people remember what that uh, seven-sided shape is called. All right. So a lot of fun with the books and a lot of conversations you can have. And this whole experience going from perfect square to circus shapes to Grandfather Tang's story, and then closing out our night with the greedy triangle, that's about an hour and 15 minutes when I'm pushing through to get here. It can take about an hour and a half when you really let people play and enjoy and engage in the mathematics. We want to just have a relaxing night where people can have these conversations with their children, think about these things, ask questions about what that looks like. And that's how we close out our time with this greedy triangle and just talking about shapes, remembering we started with a square, then a book that was about squares, triangles, and circles, then a book that had more shapes and defining what those are, and finally, the greedy triangle. It's a wonderful time to spend with these families thinking about all that goes into it. And so one of the comments that there's a lot of comments coming through, but one that I did see talks about, do I do all of these books on one night? I do all four of them on one night. I don't read all of them to everyone on that night. I read all of A Perfect Square. I read almost all of Circus Shapes, and then I just read a portion of the next two books, just because of the length and the time. If the school is able to, sometimes I have schools that will purchase the books, not usually one per family, but maybe one book per family. So books aren't cheap, but if we can get them through Scholastic or through a company that maybe has it in paperback, we want them to walk home with something that they can do with their child and a memory of that event. So it's a wonderful thing to put that book in their hand and talk about it with them. So now we've kind of gone through the agenda of what that looks like, but I also want to talk about the logistics and how do we get through all of this so that we can consider how do I put this together and what does it look like? Because sometimes a school wants to feed the families. If you're going to show up after work, after a school day, it helps to have something available. So I've had some districts, schools that have had hot dogs and chips for everyone. One of them served pizza for everyone. Some of them just put out cookies and punch. It's whatever you want to do, whatever you have the funding for, whatever you're able to put on, so that they can be comfortable and they can relax and not be thinking about what's for dinner right away, but enter into this time of mathematics and conversation, focus on all of this. So it's a wonderful time to just sit, relax, talk about math in a place that's safe, because a lot of times we have a fear of math and we don't want to pass that along to our child. So we want to make this as relaxing and comfortable as possible for the families that are showing up for this. So here are some things that I keep in mind when I'm developing what one of these events is going to look like. If it's going to be all preschool, which is typically not infants and toddlers, but just preschool, I think about what are those precursor activities that engage that family so that they're preparing them about what the math will look like once they're out of preschool. I want them engaged and working on the math right there for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, and also considering where does this lead to. We're not doing kindergarten, first grade math, but we're doing activities that will lead to kindergarten, first grade math. It helps if you can have stations or centers that families go to. So if I were to take some of the books we did tonight, like A Perfect Square or Shape Circus, I might have 2 or 3 copies of those books with activities set out with instructions so that the families can read that book together and then they can do the activity that's laid out before them. It also helps to have one of your preschool teachers, or if you have instructional assistants, paraprofessionals available, they can come alongside and man that station to help people understand what to do, that they can read through this book and take their time talking through it, asking questions. Often I will have a half sheet there that has questions that you can ask to your child while you're reading the book. So it's easy instructions that are very explicit about, as you read this book, consider these 1, 2, maybe 3 questions that you can consider as you read the book and then move on to the activity. We want it to be hands-on, engaging them in all their senses. They're going to see it, they're going to touch it, they're going to talk about it. Whatever we can do to keep them really interested in what's happening there. And also, you can tell that this whole agenda that I went through was all about shapes. But I have one coming up in a few weeks where the whole theme is going to be foods. It's going to be at a preschool, and everything's going to be food, and we're going to actually bring food in that they're going to touch, feel, move around, talk about. So we have 5 different books and 5 different stations, and each one is going to be food-based as they consider what goes into that. And I can share that sometime if you want to email me and get more information. We'll be putting all of this out eventually for anyone to have access to. If I'm doing this for primary, I'm thinking about how am I building these concepts? I might do stations and centers, or we might have things done whole group. For example, the one I just walked you through with these 4 books, that was whole group every time I've done it. Because once we get to that TK kindergarten up through 3rd or 4th grade, they're able to handle whole group, especially if they are attending as a family. I have someone with those children, keeping them into what we're doing and talking to them about it. So we again want to keep it hands-on and perhaps thematic. And then as we go into upper grades, I've done family math nights all the way up through about 6th or 7th grade. Those upper grades need something that's a little more rigorous, that's going to keep them fully interested in what's happening. So there might be some games that take a little bit longer. Perhaps I'll sample the game and then let them play child against parent, or maybe they're in pairs or 4s, 2 against 2 as they do this, to really reinforce the concepts that they've been learning, because often we want our parents to be considering the concept. Don't just do the math, but think about the math that's behind there, and that it's still fun to do, that we can have a really good time thinking about what this looks like. Not too long ago, I was asked by one of our local districts to come and do an hour of math with parents, just with parents, not with children, just to let them think about what math goes on in the upper elementary grades. So I was talking with these parents. This was 3rd through 6th grade, and going through different math that the teachers were at during their scope and sequence. So I met with teachers about what they were working on for that month. Then I would go meet with parents and talk about how they could be supporting their children through all of this. So we jump in, we talk about the math, had a great time, and then I would actually go back the next week with the Spanish-speaking families and an interpreter. My Spanish is minimal, so I was able to talk about that with both the English-speaking families and the Spanish-speaking families. And again, we talked a lot about vocabulary. It seemed like it didn't matter what the content was or how much depth there was. They just needed the words so that they could replicate this math as best as possible. So consider that about where are some of your teachers at. Maybe you have one that's specifically for maybe 1 or 2 grade levels. So what are the teachers doing right there? Or what will the teachers be doing as you move along and dig into all the math that's happening? So one thing that I will, you'll have available to look at, just a second, is a sample agenda with logistics and resources. So I have, let me share my screen again. All right, so here, this is the folder where I have everything available. So this is the conference you're attending on February 23rd. So here in the midst of it, I have my agenda. This is my shapes and primary one. If you look on here, I don't need a lot of notes for this, so I have the whole thing on just over 1 page. So I know when I go in, I'm going to talk about this is some great math you can do. This is what it can look like. I'm so glad you're here, really encouraging them, empowering them to be excited that they're a part of it. So now I have what my materials are. I need some tangrams. I need my origami paper. My handouts are all going to be hyperlinked on there. I may have a screen. If I have a screen, I'll hook up my laptop so I can show the books being read via YouTube, or I can do it myself. The Grandfather Tang book is best when it's up on a big screen because the book is too small for even 10 people to see really well. So I think about what questions I'm going to ask when I read Perfect Square. I think about what this is going to look like with some options. If I'm going to read through the next book with Circus Shapes, I might do that differently based off the size of the group. I have some notes about the questions I'm going to ask when I talk about Grandfather Tang's story, where I have a YouTube video to jump to. But a lot of questions and prompts to keep everyone thinking about these shapes, how they fit together. Like I said, you can use tangrams for proportions, fractions. It's a wonderful thing. And finally, my notes about a greedy triangle. So this is all initial, but it's all pieces that I'm going to be digging deeper into and clarifying more strongly as we move into this being available for statewide. So you get a little bit of a sneak peek about what it looks like as someone who's not detail oriented tries to become detail oriented in this. So you may have questions about, hey, John, your outline is really nice, but tell me more, give me some more details. So I'm always available and more than willing to come alongside and dig into that. All right. So that's how I do it. That's what it looks like. And we've got a few minutes left. It's 7:45 right now. So I wanted to close out our time with just some Q&A. So I'm going to look and try and catch whatever shows up in the chat and talk about that. The first one, thank you, Katie. I see, do you know if there's any resource where we could obtain some of these books for free? No, but I'll tell you, if I ever find one, I would do that. I know that sometimes your library may have some extra grants available. We have a few books that we try and save up a little bit for. We might ask. We have a foundation here at our county office, and so our foundation actually gives mini grants that we have used to purchase some of those books. And but in terms of like places that just give us books, we have been able to do that. Every now and then we'll get a local bookstore that might get like a 10% discount or 25% discount. So I've done a little bit of legwork to see if they'll offer that. Then I can take those to the family events and share that with those families. So they can say, here's a place you can go to see that. Here's a place where you can maybe purchase the book a little bit cheaper. And then as much as I prefer to have that paper copy in front of me so you can turn the page and take your time and look at it, you can always use, for the most part, use YouTube to look for that. So again, I'm a book lover. I like to hold it in my hand. A Kindle is great, but I like to turn that page. I like to smell that paper, and I want students to have that same excitement. So I'm always encouraging the book and what that looks like. I did learn recently, that's something to keep in mind. Well, we all know that paperback is cheaper than hardback, but it never clicked that libraries don't have paperback. Libraries always have it in hardcover because it lasts longer right there. So I try and now be thoughtful about what books am I using. For example, Circus Shapes, that's not available in hardback. So you're not going to go to a library and find that book. You have to purchase that book. So now I'm rethinking, well, maybe I shouldn't use Circus Shapes. Maybe I should try and find a different book that gets the same point across, but is available just in that school library. Because you as a parent, your parents can go into that school library and check books out also often when you do that. The next question is about how much time does a family math event usually take? I try and keep mine between 1 hour and 1 hour and 15 minutes, because once you go too long and it's in the evening, people are getting hungry and they're getting tired. I'll usually talk to the school administrator and say, please encourage or allow your teachers to not give homework tonight, or maybe you get like a homework pass if you attend the family math night. That way people aren't giving up over an hour. If they're going to have a meal for a half an hour and then spend an hour to 1 hour and 15 with this event, going home and getting cleaned up, giving the kids a shower, a bath, whatever they need so they can get ready for bed, that's a long night. So I try and keep it to an hour, give or take. Give them something high quality. You don't have to do all 4 books like I did. You can do a different version so that they maybe do it in under an hour or cut it off at that hour when you do it. All right, how do you get access to the Google Drive that we were showing? I was under the impression that when I shared my slide deck that it would be available for you. So I believe it will be available on the Early Math website later on. All the resources were there. That's typically how it was. That's how it was the last time that I presented for this. So you should see it there. And I'm seeing a note from one of my colleagues that yes, that's correct. These will all be posted on the Early Math site. So if it's not there now, it will all be available. So if you even want to see other sessions, every session is available. This is all being recorded. So you can go to the Early Math EMP site. You can see all the resources that I made available to you. Plus, you can watch other ones when you have some time. All right. I'm seeing some stuff about having a family math night. Could I reach out to local service clubs to donate money for purchasing books? I think reaching out to some of those service clubs is a great idea. So many of them aren't sure. They might just give a block of money to a school, unsure of what to do with it, but hoping that it gets used well. So if you know someone that is in like Elks or Kiwanis, something like that, they might be more than willing to say, we'd love to give a few $100s to support an event like that and come out and watch that. So I appreciate that idea that came in right there. Someone asked, from your experience, would a 1-hour event be enough for preschool families, or should I plan 1.5? I think 1.5 is great. I think you just have to feed them or let them know to bring something to eat. So I think 1.5, if they're going from center to center and having conversations, an hour and a half can go pretty quick. But little ones get hungry. Even the big ones get hungry. So thinking about that. What other books do I recommend? If you go to countplayexplore.org, there's all sorts of books available. Also on the EMP website, they mirror each other with the books that are there. So check out the books that are listed, because those books will all have, when you find them on the EMP or Count Play Explore site, they all have a review attached to it. So when you look at that review, it will show you activities that you can do. They're initially designed to be used as a family, so that you can go there as a mom or dad and uncle, sibling, check out what the book is, and then see the activity. But I use them also for a family math event, because they translate to that just as well. All right, and people are put in using Scholastic about finding less expensive books. Donors Choose is also a great idea. So wonderful. And I appreciate, oh, now I lost it. I scrolled too high. Someone else likes the smell of books. So I love it. So I'm always available. If you let me flip ahead to the next slides here. So we talked about all that. So finally, on this closing slide, there's all my information again. So do feel free to email. Let me know what your questions are. I can always Zoom with you, or email back and forth, or a phone call eventually, if that would help you as you think through logistics, planning, ideas for books. I'd love to speak to you about this and come alongside you as you move forward. And with that, I see someone wrote about a potluck. I love the idea of getting your families involved, right? You can get a lot of stuff done. People love coming together, building community, and the community night focused on mathematics is a wonderful thing. All right. So thanks for being a part of this, and I appreciate your time. I'll stay on to kind of answer questions in the chat, but I'm glad you could be a part of this night, this event, and then hang out for the closing part also. There is a survey available for this breakout session. And so if you could fill out that survey, so let me know what I could improve on, what we could improve on, and what would be better for you in the future. So this Early Math Symposium comes about 3 times a year. And as we keep moving forward, we want to make sure that we're being attentive to what you want to hear about, what you want to learn about, and what would be helpful for people as we move forward. So I'm hearing what the teachers I work with the schools that I support, what they'd like to learn more about, and I apply that broadly as we do this statewide work. But I'd always enjoy getting information from you. So the survey is located next to your chat. So if you could click on that, and again, send some information. We'd love to get your feedback, have you rate what's happening here, and learn all that you have and what the great things you have going on are about. Thank you so much for being here.